This is how most of the auditoriums looks now. Earlier, if you would have been speaking, would have been speaking on the stage and you would have been sitting on the chairs. But the COVID has changed many things permanently and some things temporarily. You all would have experienced this in your day-to-day life, like us. The only thing I have not tried yet is to get my haircut done by my wife. Other than life has changed a lot. So that's why my funny look. Nevertheless, on this topic, I have two distinguished guests with me. One, Arvind. He is in head of M&A as well as investor relation in Lupin. So he'll be bringing in the pharma sector perspective, which is supposedly got a bit benefited out of all these challenges. And we have Ruchit, a young co-founder of Cars24, a startup which is dealing with the cars and automotive sector, which has really badly impacted by this COVID-19 situation all over the globe, not only in India. And here with these two distinguished guests would like to hear the different perspective and how can we learn from them and then get these ideas back to our work and our life and think about it, how can we get benefit out of it, or what do we need to change in order to remain relevant in the future. So Ruchit has done MBA from Cornell University, a qualified CFA from US, and also a chartered accountant. He worked in multiple international banks and later on left his well-paying job to co-found Cars24. It's a used car disruptor. We have made a big name in India and presence all over it. More and more, it has attracted more than $3-digit million investment from Sequoia Capital and other international firms. And internet says that undisclosed money from MS Dhoni. So this is most important for us. On the other hand, Arvind, again, MBA from IIM and a qualified chartered accountant, has a vast experience in the area of pharma sector. He not only sees the domestic M&A and investment opportunity, but also internationally and globally. He has a very good perspective of how the pharma sectors are moving ahead previously and now with the current situation. I welcome both of you. Welcome, Ruchit. Welcome, Arvind. And my first question goes to you, Arvind, that how do you see COVID-19 situation is changing our life as well as impact in the pharma sectors?
Thank you. Firstly, I would want to thank Inclusify for having given me this opportunity to speak to this forum. And I would not shy away from saying that life as we see it would not be the same again, at least for the next 18-24 months is the way we see it. Having said that, I must qualify my statement by saying that by virtue of being in the pharmaceutical sector, the sector has been notified as essential services per se. And globally, as you would imagine, the importance of pharma companies has increased. But there is a distinction here. The role that Indian generic companies play is quite different from the multinational innovators who are working together to find a cure or a vaccine or a prophylactic treatment for this disease. That being said, the whole world requires it continuous supplies of medicines, etc., to keep it going. You would imagine the way the lockdown has been enforced, it led to quite a lot of uncertainty and affected the availability of laborers, particularly the contractual laborers. So I would say in the initial stage of the lockdown, even our production was getting impacted because of non-availability of contractual labor or laborers who got little comfort on how the things would pan out. But the local, central, regulatory and government agencies worked tightly to ensure that there is business continuity and to work with us together to give comfort to the workers on the norms and the measures. And I'll not repeat, the social distancing, sanitization, etc., to ensure that workplace is safe. Being in the pharma sectors, anyways, in our case, there's highest degree of sterilization and sanitization being maintained. So for us, it was an incremental step. But that was how the production facilities, supply chain, etc., was brought into motion. But take a step back, while things were brewing in China, things were brewing slowly and gradually towards other part of the world, and India was unaffected pretty much till February. We had already started seeing some kind of impact on our input side. More than 70% of pharmaceutical sector's inputs in some form of raw material is dependent on China. And while our direct dependence is only 30-35% for inputs, but some way or the other, our vendors get impacted. So we started seeing supply chain disruptions already in January, February in terms of key products. So the team set in motion in terms of the supply chain to ensure that how to maintain continuity. And this is even before the lockdown came into place, and worked overnight to ensure, that part of the issues are resolved. By the time those issues got resolved, we had manufacturing related issues in the Indian plants, etc., which started coming in. So this was more on the production and the supply chain side of things, which now we've ironed out in terms of working with vendors, etc., working with limited resources, and leveraging our learning curve to ensure that we manage our production shifts better. So those things happened. Something which we would not have imagined, just in terms of data, we would have managed, say, 90% pre-COVID level production with 60% of the staff. So obviously there's a lot of efficiency that comes into the picture. At the same time, you are letting go of things which may be needed beyond the regular course of activity, something which is needed for growth. Coming beyond the manufacturing part, we are also, the fifth largest player in the domestic pharmaceutical market, with over 7,000 people working on the ground with the doctors, detailing our product, and reaching out to all the 5 lakh plus pharmacies in the country. As the lockdown intensified, the doctors started closing their clinics. There was no direct visitations allowed, etc. So that was being envisaged. And 10 days before the lockdown was announced, we stopped our field activities as a measure of employee safety or whatever, and leveraged all kind of digital tools and technologies to ensure that we are there with the doctor. And being a sensitive company, we realized, in these times, the last of our priorities would be to go out, reach out to doctors and pitch for, detailing our products. We decided to think the other way. We reached out to them and asked them how we could be of help. So instead of using marketing efforts, we tried to be of assistance, hospitals all over the country, providing the doctors with the PPE, sanitization kits, meals, etc. We also ensured that there are regular webinars, etc. conducted. So that established some level of trust. And as gradually things started opening up, we are still leveraging digital tools to communicate with the doctors and being there for them. We are back to 70-80% only of our activity levels, because still the clinics are not open. Patients are still not coming. And this is therefore India. So while you would imagine that there is a benefit of pharmaceutical sector coming in, there is a short-term disruptions because of, the acute medications which are not getting fulfilled in the channel. Similarly, in the US market, where we are the number 3 player in terms of prescription, there was a continued benefit of some of our products due to the nature of this disease, the seasonality of flu-related products saw an uplift. And there was also overstocking of the channel due to supply chain inefficiency. US, we've seen in the April and month quarter, the prescription numbers have fallen by 40% in terms of the patient visits to the doctor's chamber. So that also now would affect the demand over a flow basis. What can only help us is that 80% of our products cater to the chronic medication, where the patient does not need to visit the doctor, they'll anyways continue. But still, overall, the supply and mood sentiment is affected in line with the economic activity. So overall, just taking a step back from the business impact per se, how have we reoriented or changed our business? Of course, there is a very regular forecasting and measures to ensure that we curtail our costs. So while sales would come down at some level, the marketing costs and the direct costs relating to that are brought down significantly, because there is a direct commitment to our stakeholders to improve profitability. So that is an ongoing effort. There is also increased spend on, obviously, sanitization and upkeep and other measures taken to ensure that we remain a safe workplace, that is not being compromised. At the same time, from the top management, it was very clear that, nothing comes before employees' safety, etc. So we kind of doubled the medical coverage for the entire staff and the life insurance coverage for the entire staff during the COVID period, to help support staff that way. So I think the companies would be far more empathetic to that. Our business being less affected, so we do not see any impact on the jobs, etc. But to ensure that long term we are doing the right things, there might be some cuts on the hikes or growth to some extent. But overall, the business is focused to achieve what they want to in the 3 to 5 year period. So I don't see, our business getting affected materially beyond a quarter. But like any other business, and Ruchit would elaborate more, multiple things would change. Unnecessary travels would stop. In fact, if I used to travel 4 times earlier, now I'll be not traveling even for once, with all my vendor interactions, company meetings, everything has smoothly transitioned to MS Teams or Zoom kind of a format. And unless it's absolutely necessary to meet up, you'll try to do it as much virtual as possible. Some of this would continue during the COVID period, but I think as the learnings of the whole efficiency comes into the picture, the time spent on traveling, hotel, etc., it would become a habit. So I leave it at that. A lot of things are changing, but for us, maybe after a quarter, things would normalize quicker than most other sectors. So
thanks, Arvind. Really insightful. In fact, couple of points was quite surprising. First, at least I was expecting that pharma sector is doing good, but as number of patients visits are going down into the hospital, it has some impact. So this was something new. And second thing was really good to know that how you are making difference in employees' life by doubling the insurance amount and those things. I'll come back to you on a few more questions on that. Let's go to Ruchit. So Ruchit, Arvind talked about innovator who's working in the area of vaccination and all. I hope this works out smooth. But you are an innovator. You have already disrupted the way how an unorganized used car business was done in India. Would like to know first that what prompted you get into the startup, and how do you see the businesses is changing in the past and now with this COVID situation coming in?
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Arvind. Quite insightful about Lupin and pharma in general. So, easy question, why did I move into a startup? It's actually quite simple. I think banking, I was in investment banking at Merrill Lynch before this. Banking is a lot to do with advising clients and helping them execute transactions. So I wanted to try my hand at executing something myself, get some operational experience. Startups made the most sense as it throws you in the thick of things from day one. And so fortunately, I stumbled upon some great entrepreneurs in the form of Vikram, Mehul and Gajendra, my co-founders here. And so they were thinking about organizing the used car market, and I just jumped on that journey. So it just worked out for me, fortunately. But, nothing sort of too interesting over there. So to your second question, what's been business like over the last 5 years leading up to Corona? So I think, as a startup, unlike an organized company, you're always, first of all, keeping an eye on the market, right? How big is that opportunity? So for us, 5 years ago, used car market was massively unorganized. Even today, it's unorganized, right? We have been there for 5 years almost, but it's still massively unorganized on the ground. And the opportunity is still massive. We are perhaps still a rounding error even at our scale today. But sort of as with any startup, we keep adapting ourselves to the changing external factors. Right. So, for example, I can think of back in 2016, prior to demonetization, all transaction in used car market used to happen primarily in cash. And after demonetization, we had to switch to online payments. That was a big deal for us. Trust me, it was to move from something which is completely cash. You have cash counting machines and people doing that, and insurance and security. Suddenly you're trying to integrate with banks to get RTGS payments done. So it took us a year to get there and we lost a lot of growth, but we have been adapting to those, right? I think the key though, what has changed between 2015 and 2020 today is investor focus. It has changed from just mindless growth to profitable growth, right? I think there are lots of examples of companies or startups which have grown crazily over the last 5 years, but today they have been questioned because there's just growth and no bottom line, right? So investors now are no longer pushing for just mindless, atrocious growth. They want growth, but they want a path to positive unit economics too. And so, that's perhaps something that has massively changed pre-corona. Fortunately for us, at least our investors have always been supportive and perhaps ahead of the curve. So we have been in better position to weather this storm. But, turning it over back to you for the questions.
Okay. Great. So since you talked about investors, Arvind, you are managing the investment as well. Could you imagine that Ruchit will find an international acquirer in this business? Nevertheless, question to you would be, how do you see a post-COVID-19 situation, attractiveness of India in terms of M&A as well as an investment?
I'll put it very fairly, investment would be attracted where the yield is highest, right? So India as a long-term opportunity has not lost its sheen. As we speak now, and there are 5 transactions, of which 2 are very large in India in the healthcare pharma space, which the PE players are lining up to close. And Ruchit would enumerate multiple such instances in the startup world, like if investors are chasing profitable growth, anybody who fits that criteria on the key things that they care about, it would go. For example, in the pharma space, people are looking at stability, brand equity, or something in the domestic branded formulation space. There are fewer assets, more chasers. People are looking for a high quality CDMO or contract drug manufacturing companies globally who have relationship with big pharma, and they take off the load of manufacturing at the back end front, ensuring quality and scalability, not competing with them. The number of opportunities is few, the valuation expectation is high, and there's enough deal flow. Yes, what I think in our case, because it's a manufacturing industry, the only part in the whole cog which gets stuck is the visitation of the manufacturing plant, doing quality analysis of the on-ground activity, etc. But everything else has smoothly moved on to a virtual mode. And all of that now, given the various structuring possibilities available, if there is an intent to close a transaction, all of that can be done. Obviously, with precautions, even travel can be done. But even if it is an international other visits, there are ways and means to get those things addressed. Maybe you can keep on hold, but discussions are ongoing, things are progressing. Investors also take some time to come to that expectation, but I think the market is competitive for good assets, so it remains that way, at least in my space. Unfortunately, nothing is coming at stone's throw valuation, whereas there are assets which have been there for 2 years now, which still have fewer takers. So I think maybe the mode of doing it has changed, but there is enough chasers for quality.
Good. Good to hear that, Arvind. Back to you, Ruchit. If you would have seen the news just a few minutes back, Tata flashed that JLR is making $500 million loss in the quarter 1. How do you see? We are seeing all this looming news. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? How the business coming up after the lockdown for you?
Yeah, no, interesting question. No, I did not see that $500 million news, but it's still, peanuts for them. They have several more billions to burn through, perhaps, just like Arvind. So I think our plan at the beginning of the year was to double this year, right? That's a startup. We talk about a very healthy clip, right? So, our target for calendar year 2020 was to double, open up more than 100 branches across several dozen cities. We wanted to add new product lines to what we offer to the customers, but Corona brought our business down to zero, like literally zero, right? So from that March 22nd or 23rd till May 3rd, practically we had zero business, and we continued to pay salary of our employees, right? And since May 3rd, when parts of the country has sort of picked up, we have seen roughly 70% recovery on our supply side, which what that means for us is 70% people are still coming to us after the lockdown, right? And a large chunk of that though is coming or requesting for a home visit from us. So in our business model, what we do is we ask consumers to come and visit us on our branches, but a large chunk of them, approximately 80% of them, are actually asking us to come to their home instead of coming to our branch for obvious reasons. On the demand side, we are seeing 80% or so recovery in June at least, right? So with that backdrop, what we are now planning to do is targeting being flat in 2019. I think to us that itself will be a victory. So it's probably going to, for us, it's going to last more than a quarter. It's going to last 4 quarters at least, right? So, as I think some of the questions that are coming in the panel, you can see we have obviously cut down massively on the cost, right? There's a huge emphasis on controlling cost. Traveling and all is all so obviously low-hanging fruit. Even employees perhaps don't want to travel anymore, but there's a massive, drive to reduce costs across the board. And then sort of for us, the largest component is people's cost, right? Salary. And so we have taken a conscious call not to fire anyone, which means every other cost has to be just more radically reduced. For us, the 2021 plan, we haven't really firmed up. Obviously, none of those old plans work, and it's too early to start thinking about 2021. But in my mind, if you ask that question, it feels to me that it would be more like a 2020 pre-corona plan. So basically, for us, we would have lost 1 year, in a sense, of our life cycle here.
So that's really incredible that you have not laid down any employees. You're paying salary despite of being a startup. And the best news which I heard that the business is back in May. So in fact, we are also seeing the similar things. Instead of customers coming to us, we are bringing car to them. Even home delivery of cars have started. Last question to you, Arvind. Since we talked about recovery, we are seeing the businesses coming back, and all of us in our area of business, we are looking at the 2020 numbers being met maybe in 2022 or 23. How do you see the recovery in general? And I'm sure the pharma would recover pretty fast as compared to the other industry. What's your take here?
So on the broader economy and the broader, level, there is a deeper problem in my mind, which we need to fix. Of course, we do have to ramp up on our healthcare ability to address issues such as this. We are entering into seasonally high level of infectious diseases, which goes into the monsoon. And our healthcare system would be tested further. So I think the government also is grappling with the same issue. There are other concerns about the economic growth or getting economy back on track. But right now, the healthcare or the burden on that is getting affected, getting their focus more right now. So I think that would take a couple of quarters of easing out. But there is no other way but to ensure the quality of corporate lending, etc., to improve, so that honest corporates which do pay up, etc., do get chance to flourish in the economy. There is only so much our economy can afford to pump it into the market directly. So they'll try to do indirect infusion, kind of giving you subvention or additional shops to start up, etc., to spend, kind of incentives, because they don't have their own money to do it. So all of that, would also result in, I would say, survival of the fittest. So many of the companies, or at least on the fringe side, etc., would find it difficult, and that would impact jobs, availability, and economic opportunities in the near term. I mean, I might have limited knowledge, but I think, for us, the problem is far more deep rooted than, the developed world, who have all the resources to take a longer term bet and move on in life. We don't have that much resources, political will, or the ability to. And of course, the fiscal discipline that the entire country needs, the income disparity, etc., aggravates the situation further. So, sorry for that, but that's how I see things.
Yeah, that's the fact. We are coming up. We are getting very interesting questions. So before we go to Q&A, one last question to you, Ruchit. That many startups are facing existential challenges. What advice would you give? Because you are in startup and you are coping up pretty well, as we have understood.
Right. No, I think you're right. I think possibly, yes, a lot of startups will probably struggle during this period. But see, most startups burn cash every month, even pre-corona. In a normal scenario, that's why they are perhaps called startups. And so they have to raise capital periodically. Now, with corona, obviously raising capital is going to be difficult, as everyone is going to take a pause to reassess the situation, right? So my advice is going to be very simple to any startup founder. You have to be ruthless in conserving capital, right? You have to move to what I would call as a survival mode, right? Don't think business as usual, aa jayega, market aa jayega. No, start moving to a survival mode. You have to shed non-core ideas and verticals right away. Shed everything which is all good to have, right? You just have to keep only must-have things, right? And I think then you have to constantly assess the market and see where do you fall in that spectrum. Are you on the pharma side or are you on the auto side, right? What is your market going to be there post-corona, right? And like, for example, Airbnb, right? And or Apple. So Apple is going to survive. Airbnb is going to have trouble surviving, right? So they have to figure out what is the product market fit going forward, right? And once you have figured that out, you need to be ready to pivot your model, right? You need to be able to switch if need be, right? I think so. That's my key advice. The second piece would be to just be open and transparent with your investors. Remember, it's their money. So, just be transparent with them. Keep them abreast. They sometimes come up with very wild ideas, but sometimes they're excellent in this scenario because no one could have envisioned corona striking us, right? So any ideas, any wild ideas are actually welcome. So keep them abreast, be transparent with them. I think overall, of course, as human psychology goes, you have to be very optimistic, right? Things will work out. And that's the message you need to continue to give to your teams and your employees. Otherwise, there'll be panic, right? So perhaps that would be my advice.
No, great, thanks. So we have many questions. I'll just put the first question and maybe Arvind, if you'd like to answer it first. The question is, Navneet is asking, what can government do in addition to easier money availability to improve the economic sentiments and earning improvements and GDP growth? Shouldn't government encourage spending by the household?
Yes, like I said, the government should do things like it to promote investments. I think many infrastructure projects, etc., that were pending, which would help bring employment to the masses or the contractual laborers who are so scared about their livelihood. That needs to be taken care of, to get the masses going. That is under step one. At the middle class level, there's a lot of impetus that need to be given to start spending, about giving hope about things normalizing. Something like giving additional income tax rebates for investment into the healthcare or for your insurance and the like, would also help to some extent. But I think getting the broader denominator problem solved at the ground level is more important than taking care of other things. And of course, take all the necessary funding from international agencies, etc., to get those infrastructure projects moving. So I think
So,
that
I can give an example. Means since in my role, I get an opportunity to see how the other things are happening. So surprisingly, from March onwards, our vehicle sales in China is a lot more higher than the targeted numbers, even in Korea and now in Japan as well. It looks like, at least in those economies, there is kind of revenge kind of spending. So people are spending more because they are not able to spend in the last 1 month and 2 months. And here also we have seen it, one such example, which was quite common. You would have seen in WhatsApp, as soon as the liquor shop was open, people are standing in kilometers in queue to buy it. So probably I would say, could you imagine that making easier to buy things would also help in improving the spending? Or maybe Ruchit, when you are allowing people to buy cars online, used car and all payments done, are you seeing this trend? That if you're making it easier for people to buy and sell cars is improving the turnaround time and the number of transactions?
So I think, it's a hard question. I don't think any of the analogies that you're giving from any of the other countries, specifically apply to India. Even if it does, what the product you're talking about is a luxury Mercedes versus a used Honda City or a WagonR. So the learnings that you are alluding to are perhaps not the right learnings. Analogy may not be right. I don't think we are seeing revenge buying or selling. However, what we are seeing is an increased consciousness of, not just people of India, people who can afford, that they want to shun, public transportation for some time, right? And yeah. I'm sure if you just think of as a common man, right, when you hear all this news, you see posters and WhatsApp groups and whatnot, communication from government, lockdown, you start to fear. And when you are in fearful mode, you probably don't want to take that metro, maybe, right? If you can afford it, you would want to buy a car. So our survey indicates that, 50% plus people are now thinking of switching their mode of transportation from a public transportation, Ola, Uber, or metro or bus to a private vehicle, right? Question is whether they will buy a new car or a used car. So 70%, overwhelmingly, a large chunk of those people are looking to buy a used car now, which augurs well for the used car industry, right? So new car would probably be a net loser in this. However, used car should, positively see positive trends. But the question is like, when will that happen, right? And that can only happen once we have reached the pre-corona baseline, and then we'll see how it grows from there. So I don't think people are going to buy just because we are increasing the convenience. They're going to buy because they feel it's the right thing to do, and they fear for their and their family's safety. That perhaps will drive that more.
Yeah. Thanks, Ruchit. Ruchit, we have two specific questions for Cars 24. The question is more, for example, for the Gurgaon-based office. So could you imagine that the lease rent or the property that is leased by you is getting impacted because of the corona situation? And is the approximate percentage reduction of the rents in the corporate offices would probably help you to reducing the cost, and how sustainable is it? And how do you see in like tier 1 and other cities?
Yeah, of course. I think well articulated question. I think roughly 10% of our cost is rental, fixed rental, right? We are not in a real estate business, but we do need space to operate, our branches. What we have done is, of course, started with our big corporate offices, with work from home now getting notoriety, and, jury is still out there whether it will work, subsequent to lockdown, subsequent to in normal times. But by and large, we have shifted an entire workforce to work from home. So that for us has resulted in several corporate offices across India, local headquarters to be shut down, right? So that's simply, getting out of contracts eventually. we have also taken this opportunity to sort of renegotiate rentals, if you will, wherever possible, right? So this can include reduced rents. It includes not paying the rent for the corona period. I think a large part of that would be going forward, what is the reduced rental and for what period are you logged in? So we have a large team who's just focusing relentlessly on trying to reduce that cost. To give you some stats, now our cost base, hypothetically, if the rent was 100 rupees earlier, everything put together, right now it's averaging 70. So for us, we have been able to reduce 30 rupees during the lockdown in terms of effective rent going forward, right? So that's part of cost saving, but I still feel there's a lot of juice. I think my team's target is to get to 50. So they'll probably achieve it sometime in July as market picks up, right? So we are, of course, doing it across the branches and across cities and across functions.
Okay, we have many interesting questions, but because of the paucity of time, we'll take last one or two. Maybe Ruchit, one more question directly to you. Do you see media cost going down or the advertisement cost going down?
I think so. If rental was 10% of our cost, media is like 30% of our cost. So you can imagine, Dhoni ads are fairly expensive for us. So yes, media cost has gone down drastically, but that's not because, Star TV is giving me a discount. It's because I'm choosing not to advertise on TV, right? So there's a distinct difference there. So our cost of purchasing every car, which is what we call a CPP, or cost of inspection, which is the cars that come to a branch for inspection, both of these have come down drastically. That's because we have stopped the most expensive medium, which is TV. We have also stopped radio, right? We have stopped taking any new hoardings, right? So no BTL activities for the time being. Of course, it's not even possible because of Corona. It's sort of tight, hard to move. Where we are spending though is digital marketing, right? So that expense has gone up. But overall, our marketing spend has come down. I think it will probably go up once market comes back to normal levels. But in a way, I'm not complaining because I'm saving a ton of money till then.
That's good. And maybe we take the last question. And so the question is that, is it justified to say that instead of measuring employees' inputs, companies will shift to results orientation or look forward to the metrics like market share and customer feedback during the pandemic? Right. What's your opinion? How do you see this?
I think that's an absolutely fantastic question. We actually have been fortunately doing this since last year. Our entire KRA KPI framework has shifted to an output-based versus input-based mechanism. So any frontline person where performance can be quantified is now measured in the form of a KPI, and that's all output driven. His incentives are based on that. His performance improvement plan is based on that. What we have done during the pandemic is essentially also taken a pause and tried to create for some of those support functions like HR or finance or marketing, where it's just hard to quantify numbers in a short frame of time, right? So there we are still sort of struggling to find that balance between input and output, but the objective is to move that to an output-based metric as well. I think as sort of, startups unfortunately have to go through this cycle where, it's just very, if I were to conclude, it's as a startup, it's hard to simply retain employees for a long term if they're not performing. Now the question is, what is performance, right? Now in a large company like a State Bank of India or Infosys, where you have perhaps lakhs of employees, it's okay to have lots of meeting expectation kind of employees, like an average employee. But a startup can't afford to have average employees, and over a period of time, they want to grow fast. They want to grow 100% year on year, the way we grow our top lines as a startup, right? But sometimes their own capabilities are limited. They can't grow 100% year on year in terms of their personal growth or their, designation or salary growth. And so some of those employees who may be very good at, let's say, a lower band, but as they move to the higher band, they start becoming sort of hard to manage. And that's why we have shifted to an output-based metric than an input-based metric.
Thanks, Ruchit. That's really insightful, and thanks everyone. So we are almost at the end of this chat. Unfortunately, Arvind has to leave earlier. So, and we could not answer all the questions. So those questions will be answered separately, but thanks a lot for putting up really interesting questions. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Thanks. Thanks, Team Inclusify. Bye-bye.